Katie Hinker. The first speaker is Caitlin Hinker from Michigan State University. She is an associate professor of physics education, research, and outreach at Michigan State, and she does her research on informal learning environments within physics, especially around the impact of facilitating these programs, how the audience receive these programs, and also the national scale trends in informal physics. So Katie.
Okay. So is it okay if I share my screen then for a minute or so?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna try to do that quickly. Apologies. So thanks for having me on the panel. I just prepared a couple quick slides to tell a little bit about myself and maybe some current research that is interesting and sort of sets a stage for a lot of the other people on the panel and people I assume in the meeting of what you're all doing related to informal physics and public engagement. So I just want to say I'm a assistant professor at Michigan State University right now, and in physics, and I have been my journey through physics up to this point has been exciting one. It definitely starts here with getting interested in physics through a lot of ways that were not part of a classroom setting. So in this slide, you can see a picture of my mom on the left-hand side, who is a professor in not physics, but in pharmacy, pharmacology. And I used to hang out in her lab a lot as a kid. And so being in the lab environment was pretty normal to me. Being on a campus was pretty normal to me. Here's a picture of a kid putting themselves in a bubble at the Ann Arbor, Michigan Hands-On Museum, which I used to go to as a kid a lot and do lots of fun physics activities there. And for my senior high school project, I got to go to Fermilab for a week-long experience, following around a bunch of women graduate students and postdocs and getting to know about their research. And then in college, I got really involved in a group who did a lot of physics demos, and the grape in a microwave demo here is my top one. This is actually from a research paper people did. So this is a little more controlled environment, but I highly recommend thinking about how you can create a plasma ball in your microwave using grapes. And so as every part of my sort of academic journey through physics has involved public engagement or outreach in some way. So I was an undergrad at Ohio State, helping doing some fluid dynamics research, but also helping people stand on top of their parents lying on beds of nails. As a graduate student doing biophysics research, I was able to get a TA-ship that allowed me to go around and do physics demo shows for elementary and middle schools in the area. And then as a postdoc, I switched away from maybe more traditional physics research to physics education research, where I was also able, at the University of Colorado, to work in a physics frontier center, the Gila Physics Frontier Center, leading their outreach program, educational outreach programs, including a big after-school program that I organized and then was able to do research on. And so what am I working on now, just for another minute or two? In my current work, I'm interested in not just what's happening in individual programs, but I'm really interested in the landscape collectively of public engagement in the US and beyond overall. I think in my personal experience, I've had so many places I've been, different institutions I've been in, where I've been able to share my enthusiasm and love of physics in different ways with the public. And here's just a map of the US with just a smattering of different logos, in no way comprehensive here, of different kinds of public engagement programs that are happening. And the big question I have, and that we're working on now, is what does this look like for everyone? We know there are demo shows. We know there are like physics lecture series on Saturdays. We get to hear at conferences, and I'm excited to hear from people about their specific programs. But how can we think systematically about the kind of educational opportunities we're engaging the public with as physicists, and that the public is getting to experience. And I just thought I'd share one or two more slides about some of the early stages of this work we're doing. So in my research group now, we have NSF grant to sort of look at these different aspects of informal physics programs that exist, thinking about personnel, the undergraduate and graduate and faculty that are involved in these, that volunteer in these, the kind of program content, the activities, the kind of physics and astronomy that gets communicated about. For lack of a better word, the audience or participants who engage with physics folks in doing this work and in having these experiences. Also the resources and institution that help support these programs, and as well as any assessment, formal or informal, that happens in these programs. And I'll just share, I think, do I have 1 minute left here? I'll just share quickly that, oops, does it pop up? I think, oh yeah, okay. So far what we've done is we've done some national sampling to develop a survey and an interview protocol with the smaller national subset of programs. And then we've comprehensively attempted to look at one state as a test case that has a wide variety of types of physics degree granting institutions, public universities, private universities, national labs, rural, urban, suburban areas, to see what kinds of things, what can we say about what's going on. And a few just quick interesting facts so far, that the main position of the facilitator of these programs, the lead facilitator, is usually students or staff, and is often not faculty, and especially tenure system faculty make up the smallest group. And that student organizations and these staff-led programs are the bulk of the programs that we're seeing, again, in this sort of test case sample, rather than like institution-led or driven activities. And we see programs of all different sizes. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, with all different kinds of physics involvement. So some programs have large amounts of undergrads. In fact, the biggest programs have the largest amount of undergrad volunteers. And that the range of topics, can vary, but astronomy topics are really popular also, not just physics topics. And I think, situationally, geographically, you might see nuclear physics, for example, in Michigan being a hotter topic than in other parts of the country. And I don't want to take up any more time, I guess, than I am allotted. So I will stop there, but I'm excited to hear about everyone else's programs and to have a fun discussion.
Thank you, Katie. Our next speaker is Stephanie Dean. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. So she's an assistant professor in engineering physics department at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she serves as the APS Division of Plasma Physics Executive Committee, so DPP, and then the DPP Committee for Women in Plasma Physics. And he's also a co-leader on the US Fusion Outreach Team. She has been trained in the science communication at the Alan Alda Institute. So Stephanie, go ahead.
Okay, hi, thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm really excited about this. And I guess I don't have any slides, so I was going to start by telling you my background. So I originally started outreach when I was a scientist at Oak Ridge National Lab. Plasma physics, historically, very low representation of women. So whenever they had outreach events, they would try and incorporate some diversity. So they would just grab me all the time for these outreach events. And I was horrible, actually. I was very nervous. I didn't know how to talk to the public. I was too into the weeds for all of my details of my research. I do fusion energy research in plasma physics, and really missing the ball and talking to the public. So that's when I happened upon Alan Alda's Science Communications Bootcamp. So they take scientists from all over the US. This was 4 years when I went. We all flew to Stony Brook University for a 5-week boot camp. And that's where they taught us, their techniques are to teach scientists improv techniques. So that's that technique of yes, and it's more of an empathetic communication, using empathy to understand people and where they're coming from. And that really revolutionized and changed the way I do outreach and made me a lot more comfortable. I loved the program because it talked about how to talk to a variety of different audiences, ranging from middle school, which we did a lot, to college age, to talking to the general public for presentations, op-ed, and also taking outreach. And every time you talk to your neighbors, you're actually doing outreach for science. So that really helped me a lot to not only grow as, improve my outreach approaches and make like now I use more demos and interacting with people, but also makes me a better scientist because I'm interacting with the public more. I'm getting more of their input and engaging with them on how they view science. And it kind of sparks creativity inside of me too. And then also the US Fusion Outreach Team. So I'm co-leader of that, and that is a grassroots organization we found in plasma physics and fusion that a lot of people were doing outreach. There was no coordinated efforts, and it was taking individually a lot of time on each person to make material for outreach events. So we thought, let's get this grassroots organization together so we can kind of crowdsource outreach material. So we have about 150 people who are part of this Google group for the US Fusion Outreach Team, and we share resources. We have monthly meetings where people come and share different techniques or images like graphics we can use, photos. We have a repository of a bunch of presentations that we're all free to grab material from. And this has been great because it's really lowered the barrier of entry for scientists in our field and graduate students and undergrads to get outreach material so they can just hit the ground running for a lot of their outreach campaigns. So that's kind of where I'm coming from and my background in outreach. So a lot of it's to the general public, but also I do in our field, we have Fusion Day. It's on the Hill, so we have this chance to talk to representatives. And so for that this year, we did a congressional briefing that was online. And so that was a really well constructed video that gave you the input, basically the scientific background of fusion and plasma sciences of our field. And then it was someone gave a technical presentation about strategic planning, and then they wanted me to talk. And so when you kind of look at what you have when you're interacting with the public, very technical details, and really what I learned in this yes and, the Alan Alda communications is personal stories. Make it personal so that people can relate to what you're doing and you're really engaging with people, and they're more likely to engage further with you and be a part of science then. So thank you so much. I think I just hit my time. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was great. I actually got to meet Alan Alda here in Ireland for a SciComm conference.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So our next speaker is Shannon Greco. She's the Science Education Senior Program Leader at Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory at Princeton University. She is the chair of the APS Forum on Outreach and Engaging the Public, and she has 17 plus years of experience coordinating national networks of education outreach professionals. So Shannon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I love seeing the plasma representation here. I love the grapes. Thank you, Katie and Steffi. Yeah, I'm Shannon Greco. As Claudia said, I am the chair of the Forum on Outreach and Engaging the Public. So join folk, join now. Doesn't cost you anything. And we do have some good resources. There's a great discussion board on APS Engage. So my path to this career doesn't have anything to do with physics research at all. I am not a physicist. So in Katie's graph, I'm that staff wedge, coordinating these education outreach programs. And I do have quite a lot of experience in this field. My first 12 years, though, were in a material science research center through the NSF. So that was an NSF-funded research center. Now I am at Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, which is a Department of Energy national lab. So different funders have different requirements for any kind of public engagement. Broader impacts you probably are familiar with is what NSF likes to call it, and that was what I was working on when I was at the MRSEC, the Materials Research Science and Engineering Center. And that was very much, we were interpreting it anyway as a mandate to get every single scientist who got any kind of funding from the center to participate in some sort of public engagement. But that meant juggling everyone's strengths and weaknesses and finding lots of different kinds of programming to maximize the impact that our scientists had on the general public and put them in spaces where they felt comfortable. So a lot of my experience is not in doing the outreach and the engagement myself, but preparing scientists to do that. So I do a lot of training of scientists to prepare them to go before an audience, typically a K through 12 audience. That's sort of where I'm most comfortable, but also just, you know, general public and non-scientists and audiences like that. We've also done a lot of work with informal science education, like centers, like science museums and science centers, partnering with those. That's a great opportunity. If you haven't done that before, I highly recommend it. But at the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, we're DOE funding. We don't have that broader impacts requirement, which sort of is this double-edged sword. With the NSF, you had something to force your scientists to talk to people, even if they didn't want to. But with DOE, you get to work with people who really want to, and that's fantastic. But you also can't make them. So, so you have a smaller pool. So we, at the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, we're much more invested in why it's good for the scientists themselves to engage with the public and thinking about how do we make it an invaluable experience for them and, you know, develop their own communication skills. But we have a whole suite of programs. I'm a big believer in multiple ways of accessing audiences and engaging them at many different points along their path. All of our programs are kind of connected. You know, we've got these Science on Saturday lectures, and if that sparks their interest, then they might pursue a one-day intense event, and then that might spark them to pursue a high school internship. And then if they participate in the internship, they might go on to an undergrad internship or an undergrad workshop. So it's a lot of people who have participated in any of our programs have participated in more than one. And so that multiple entry point we really like. So I also like that Steffi brought up Fusion Day. So we also, a lot of our scientists participate in Fusion Day, but I personally have done, as a representative of FOPE, done the APS Congressional Visits Day, and I highly recommend y'all do that. It's so much fun, and it is definitely not your typical general public audience. So Claudia, I know, likes to talk about different publics, different kinds of public audiences you're trying to reach. There's not just one uniform monolith public. So it's the staffers typically of congressmen, you know, and senators. So that audience is looking for a very particular thing. So a lot of my training to scientists, and you know, something that I think a lot for myself, is what does your audience want, and what are you trying to achieve with your outreach program or your public engagement program or informal learning experience. So they want to hear very specific things. So you need to always be tailoring your message. So that's sort of where all of my work kind of flows around. I dabble in social media. I am not good at it. Rose is really good at it. You should hear Rose do it. But there's lots of ways to engage with people, and there's lots of different people who have different needs and interests. And so you've got to really be diverse in how you approach these things. So I'm going to be pretty brief, and I'll let the next person move on.
Thank you, Shannon. Thanks for pointing out the publics. I like that. You were listening on the first.
I was.
And also, I forgot to say from Steffi's conversation, we will actually have a storytelling workshop on June 16, I believe, if you want to participate on that one. So, but our next speaker is Stephen Goffard. So have a special place in my heart because he's a particle physicist and that's my background. He is currently the chair of the International Physics Outreach Group, and he is a public engagement enthusiast in many different varieties of ways. So I'll let you go ahead.
Well, thank you, Claudia. It's nice to know I have a place in your heart. I hope to get a place in everyone's hearts one day. Yes, indeed. I'm a particle physicist. I work on the ATLAS experiment at the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, which you heard of probably several years back when we found the Higgs boson along with CMS. That made life really easy to engage the public. So I highly recommend, if you want to engage the public, to have a major discovery that changes how we look at the universe. Short of that, there's other ways. I made a little presentation because I could talk about myself. I've done a lot of different things. I've coordinated outreach for the ATLAS experiment, especially at the time that we found the Higgs boson, which was challenging, but a lot of fun. I helped to develop different programs doing the music of physics and physics of music at the Montreux Jazz Festival. I've made a TED Ed animation and stuff that you do once you get old. You do lots of things. And I also served on APS's Committee for Informing the Public, which was a lot of fun. I got to meet some very cool people from APS that way. But I want to actually launch some conversation by talking about something that has nothing to do with particle physics, perhaps. So let me just share a screen with you and give you just a quick thing. Here we go. Up. And I have to get over to it. You guys can see it, but I can't. Okay, so I call this a little story. We like storytelling, I heard. So it's a story called Once Upon a Pandemic. It's a story that you may have heard before. In fact, it's a story you're probably very tired of by now. But I just want to go through it because I think that, you know, we all love doing this, but I think the motivation is what's key. You can do anything well if you're extremely motivated. So once upon a time, there was a terrible virus. And that virus invaded our planet. The scientists, fortunately, they reacted very, very quickly. They got excited, they got together, they did whatever they could do to figure it out. They learned how it spread. They learned it spread through aerosols. They learned about the distances and things like this. And I mean, fortunately, they'd done a lot of fundamental research before this. They mapped out how it was propagating, who was getting it worse than others, what they were doing, and they informed us immediately. I mean, this was actually some guy wrote up this view of this from Johns Hopkins. It was just something he did out of as a hobby, and then it got caught on. But of course, WHO put that up. It's fantastic. They also told us what things we shouldn't do immediately. Well, none of that stuff. That's out. Okay, stay away from each other. Keep your distance. Kids, go home and learn from there if you can. They told us what we should do, what would help keep us all healthy, and wise advice. We kept our hands clean, we wore masks, we stayed away from each other. And they developed tools for testing. This is the fakest photograph I've ever seen. If anybody has had a test, it doesn't look like that. It looks like this, actually. So that it's a horrible, I've had it done several times, and I feel that my brain was touched by that thing. And they also did something amazing. Thanks to fundamental research that they had struggled to get funding 15 years earlier, they were able to use things like mRNA to come up with a vaccine in record time, much faster than anybody predicted that we could. And we got it out and distributed and are getting it to people around the world. They saved millions of lives, but in the meantime, many people did die and are still dying, and needlessly, many, many more than needed to, considering our knowledge and our understanding of the science. So we all get angry about that. We could have done much better, right? So who do we blame? Why didn't we just immediately flatten the curve, stay home, wait it out, and do exactly what the scientists told us to do? So, you know, there's lots of people, lots of blame goes around, especially when you talk to your friends that are scientists. They say, oh, it's the politicians. There's some who played political games with this. They just lied. They just said whatever was on their minds. Some people can't help but do that. or they blamed also the media. Unfortunately, I seem to pick on Fox News, but there's probably a good reason that there's a correlation with that. And yeah, all of these guys are telling lies and hurting things. We know that. And then also they blame public. What about these ignorant people? They think that they're going to have 5G. I'm really upset because I got my shots and all, and I don't have 5G. So they, it's just the public, they're ignorant. So I just want to pose this question to all of us, something to think about, and maybe we can discuss, and I hope we'll see some discussion, some questions on the chat later on, is did we really do everything that we could? Or are there other things that we could be doing, we could have been doing, and we could be doing now to prevent problems like this? So I'm going to end that, stop my sharing up, and I will stop there.
Thank you, Stephen. Very, very timely. And in part, what prompted this webinar series on how can we help more scientists engage in a more effective way with different publics. So our next speaker is Lindsay Olson. She's a textile artist with a science-based practice. She's been artist in residence for Fermilab and CERN. So she partners with scientists to create inspiration and using her artistic training to create artwork that is diverse as science itself. So Lindsay, please take this.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. As mentioned, I am the outlier. I am not a scientist. I am an artist with a science-based practice. And so what I want to do today is share a little bit of my process with you and kind of describe how I put together the science and the art. So as mentioned, I worked as Fermilab's first artist in residence. And as an artist, my work takes me out of my studio to places like this. This is the cavernous ring of equipment designed to accelerate tiny bits of matter at near the speed of light. And here it is that scientists want to crack open the secrets of neutrinos, and I want to explain it using art. So art and science are both deeply human endeavors. And I think it's just been very heartening for me to hear today the discussion about storytelling, because I think it's imaginative storytelling that really helps connect scientific discoveries with human experience. So to give you a little discussion about my projects, they have three important phases. The first phase is learning accurate science. And as a non-scientist, this is a considerable hurdle for me. And I had lots and lots of help at Fermilab. It was great. So the next step is to figure out a way to design art that will engage the audience. And oftentimes you only have maybe 2 or 3 seconds to grab someone's attention. So the art has to be really strong. It has to stand on its own. And then the third part of my projects involve booking art exhibitions, participating in science festivals, doing lectures, publishing articles, that kind of basically any opportunity to connect with the public is what I'm looking for. So I create a full immersion experience. So to learn the science, I interview scientists. I typically have a couple of science advisors. I participate in intensive training. I read books and articles, I visit labs, and out of this scaffolding, I create artwork that illuminates the science. So when I began the work at Fermilab, I started with the basics of the standard model. And many artists use stuff like, oil paint or watercolor or other traditional material to explain their art. But I wanted to figure out a way to have the least amount of distance between the artwork and the science in the artwork. So everybody uses textiles all the time. So I thought that would be a really useful medium to engage the public. I'd like to share a couple of pieces of art to show you how I've combined the art and science concepts with high energy physics. The explanations that I'm going to share are the explanations that I would give to the general public. So the standard model of particle physics has been hugely successful in predicting particles, including the Higgs boson, as mentioned earlier, whose existence was experimentally confirmed in 2012. However, after years of correctly predicting particles, physicists now know that the standard model doesn't tell the complete story. So in this piece, I have a shortened version of the standard model provisionally attached to the piece. And I'm expressing the idea that the standard model might have to be substantially changed as new theories are developed. I've also left room for undiscovered particles in the center of the piece. And my work, like current theories, might prove to be obsolete in the future. And I guess that's the risk I have to take of being a science artist. If you look carefully at, I'm not able to advance my slide. One sec. Oh, got it. Okay, there. So if you look carefully in the background of this piece, I've camouflaged small h's. The Higgs particle was theorized for over 50 years and required the development and realization of the Large Hadron Collider. And I wanted the Higgs particle to be difficult to find in the artwork to reflect this scientific challenge. At Fermilab, scientists study another group of particles called neutrinos, and they permeate our universe. They're nearly massless neutral particles that interact so rarely with other matter that trillions of them are passing through us right now. And in this piece, I'm portraying the billions of neutrinos generated in the beam at Fermilab as a cascade of fibers in the middle of the piece. I'm using the visual metaphor of nets to suggest how detectors capture images of these rarely interacting particles. And here the detector is represented by velvet squares joined by lines of beads and in 3 subtle colors. And I'm using those 3 colors to express the dynamic nature of neutrinos. You can get a little bit of a close-up picture of the piece. So one of the most satisfying parts of my project is interacting with the public. I participated in dozens of outreach events with both science, where both the science and the art were met with enthusiasm. So I consider myself an ambassador for the research conducted at Fermilab. And these are just a few examples of the kinds of outreach that I've been able to participate in. Fermilab a couple of years ago hosted a Story Collider podcast, but I see APS is putting up together their own storytelling workshops. I think that's a great way to connect the people who conduct research with the public. That's great. I'm a member of the Art at CMS project, and we hosted an art science event for the public at the P5 at CERN. And now that exhibition is touring in Europe. Last spring, the Chicago Council of Science and Technology hosted a virtual talk by Dr. Kirsty Duffy and myself, where we both shared our different approaches to scientific outreach. And I'd also like to add here that I applied for and received an APS mini outreach grant, and that was responsible for partly funding this project and allowing me to do so many events with the work that I created at Fermilab. It's really great. So there's really strict rules that define what activities get to be called scientific, but before an experiment begins and after the data is analyzed, there's really lots and lots of room to connect science with human experience. And so my appeal to all of you today is to think about inviting and collaborating with, making room for lots of creative types like dancers and playwrights and poets, maybe even some historians or authors. And together, it would be cool if we could use art to help spread the word that you really don't need a PhD to fall in love with physics. And so I'll end my presentation there.
Thank you, Lindsay. I love the neutrino piece. That was actually, my research was on neutrinos before I jumped into physics education research. And I love the way that you showed the dynamic of the flavor of neutrino oscillation changing. So our next speaker is Mario Borunda. He's an associate physics professor and undergraduate research coordinator at Oklahoma State University. He has worked towards producing a positive impact in undergraduate research through engaging minority students in and being a faculty advisor of the Untitled Chapter at the university. And he's also a technical officer with the National Society of Hispanic Physicists. So Mario.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So One of the things that we do in the Committee on Minorities, one of our priorities is to increase the fraction of underrepresented minorities who pursue and complete undergraduate physics degree, and also to undertake actions to reverse the decline on the fraction of African Americans who have received undergraduate physics degrees. So one of the major programs that we're doing is this one with the APS National Mentoring Community Program. So we're trying to improve the mentoring that underrepresented minority students are receiving. I think that most of us here are physicists because we had an awesome mentor. Maybe it was a mentor in high school, maybe it was through our undergrad, graduate work, postdoctoral work, or even as professionals. But the main thing would be, how did we choose the mentor? Usually the mentor chose us, right? And this is what the NMC is trying to remove, that barrier for people that are not getting the proper mentorship so that they can complete the program. So if you're looking for somebody to mentor, this is a really cool program, the National Mentoring Community. It helps connect people even at different places, and usually with students that are underrepresented. And advocates for students at risk of not completing their physics degree due to financial need. Can we get to the next slide? So for instance, we have this set up, the National Beam Fund, and it awards NMC mentees that have a mentor up to 1,500 to help them continue their degree. It was made possible in part by the generous support of the Kenton and Amy Brown Fund of the Winston-Salem Foundation. And when an undergraduate is having or experiencing something unforeseen, maybe a financial emergency that they won't be able to continue their studies, the mentee fills a form, the mentor gets contacted and says, yes, this is my mentee and they do need this. And then we try to give them this amount up to 1,500 so that they can continue in their education. In at least in the next 48 hours, we try to provide this funding. So if it's somebody that is getting evicted because somehow their landlord decided to raise their rent or something like that, this is a program that we have. Next slide, please. And the mentees, when they join, they get to be APS members for the first year. That includes the subscription for the Physics Today. There's also special programming for undergraduates at APS meetings and the Vector newsletter for undergrads. They also get access to everything that APS members have access to, including the educational and career resources. And we also have a national mentoring community events throughout the year and the Bean Fund. So travel support is part of being a mentor or a mentee. And here is the website. There are resources for mentors so that they can get to know what, like for instance, maybe you think, okay, I want to mentor somebody, but I don't know how to bridge what's happening, racial protests, that is happening. We have actual resources and webinars in our website that would be useful. For instance, in you and your mentee discussing some issues that are happening currently, maybe something that is affected them, something like COVID. We would have some monthly reminders. So when you're meeting with your mentee as a mentor, you have something to discuss and go with that. And it's all in this website too. And I think I need one more slide and that's it, right? Yeah. This one is the final thing. In 2020, we had a National Mentoring Community Conference. It was in the University of Central Florida. In 2018, and at the end of 2018, we had one in Stanford, which is the picture that you see here. And it was also at the Google facilities. That was at the end of 2018, that we had one at the beginning of 2020. And that was the last conference that happened in person because of COVID. This year in 2021, it was virtual. And then we're thinking that the next one, and also the next one will also be virtual, and we'll have more smaller services and webinars and such and discussions on the internet. But hopefully in 2022, it will come back to be an in-person conference. So join the APS National Mentoring Community. If you're a mentor looking for a mentee, or if you want to just be part of it, please do so. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you, Mario. And I put the link for the MMC community on the link. So if you have any other questions regarding that. Our last speaker, and the only one at my time zone, Shane Bergen. He is a physicist and a science educator in the University College Dublin. And he's also, well, I would say quite a radio persona here in Ireland, with presence in different shows monthly and weekly. And he also has run several popular informal science campaigns through Dublin, and was the co-founder of an interdisciplinary program that blends music and physics. So Shane, you're ahead.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Rose, for organizing such a great event. It's a real honor to be amongst such fantastic physicists and engineers who are talking about their work this evening. I guess, like many of you who are tuning in, you've taken every opportunity that's come your way with regard to physics education, be it formal or the informal stuff we're talking about now. And I feel like I was that guy in college, and despite how many times professors would say, don't do this, it's going to get in the way of you becoming a physicist, I ignored it because I loved it. And I'd say now that informal learning, outreach, public engagement, whatever you call it, it offers a diverse and an inclusive way for peoples to engage with physics and with physicists. And I've enjoyed being involved in so many campaigns and projects over the years. And I suppose at this stage, a little over 20 years after starting undergraduate, I would say that there's some values that come to mind when I think about the programs I work on. And I thought I'd share with you those values, just mindful that Claudia and Rose have positioned this as a potential community of practice. And so I thought I'd talk about values first, think about the practices associated with them, and highlight the great community of people I have the good fortune to work with. So the first one is that working with diverse teams leads to diverse outcomes. It helps me to be open-minded and helps me to think differently about physics and physicists. I'll come back to that. It's a good one. The second is it doesn't have to just be about physics. And I think a lot of the other presenters have designed programs that show that's true. And finally, I can test a value that's very important for my programs is the way in which scientists work is more important than the stuff that scientists produce. That's quite contentious. So let's go back to the first one. Diverse teams matter. And I'll give you an example of a program. One of the first outreach grants that I was awarded was I had just started my first lectureship, and I was given money to run a campaign on the Dublin Metro system called DART of Physics. It's called the DART, the train. We were putting physics ads in the train, such as, is the person next to you standing too close? ... Don't worry, they're mainly empty space. Stuff like that. And with this budget came great responsibility, but also great opportunity to work with designers and artists. And at the start, I very much had this mindset of I'm hiring in, or I'm paying for this external expertise. And I quickly learned that was really going to limit any project I was involved in, because I was limiting the creativity and the ownership of those partners. And so moving from a hiring to a collaborative space really made the difference in that campaign for me and for all of the other people involved. We had such good fun putting physics in places it quote unquote doesn't belong around Dublin. That was Dartmouth Physics quite a while ago now. The second value that I spoke about was it doesn't just have to be about physics. And yeah, that's great. I am a physicist. I love being a physicist, but it doesn't define me on its own. I think if I weren't a physicist, I'd love to be a musician. And this led me to have conversations with colleagues from the National Concert Hall where the Irish Symphony lives. We were just chatting about how much physics and music have in common. I know Stephen mentioned a program there a moment ago. And we dreamt up one here for Dublin called Quavers to Quadratics. And it sees children play with ideas common to physics and music. And crucially, they are led in their play by undergraduate students from physics and music. And we've explicitly modeled this as a community of practice. It's 7 years on the go now, and it's drummed up all sorts of interests from research through partnerships with schools and other informal programs, learning from us and with us how successful we've been able to make this undergraduate-led approach. The final one, that the ways in which scientists work is arguably more important than the stuff that scientists produce. I guess you might be saying, I'd rather have my vaccine than consensus. But I would argue there would be no vaccine without consensus around how new knowledge is formed. And this is perhaps leading me down a very interesting path on my career at the moment, looking at the nature of expertise itself and what gives scientists, I suppose, the label of trustworthiness, or for some, not having trustworthiness. And so I'm working with philosophers at the moment in my school and various other places across Europe on a project called Peritia. And we're exploring the nature of trust in science and the nature of trust in expertise. And that's absolutely fascinating. And I'm in the middle of producing and making a podcast series that will explore related themes, scratching at things like conspiracy theories, the nature of trust, and other such juicy topics that I hope to share with friends and colleagues in the American Physical Society in the near future. So that's a quick summary of some of the values that I associate with outreach or public engagement, and how I suppose now I can look and see how I can connect those values to the things that I'm doing. And I have to say, as I said at the start, there'd be nothing without a wonderful community in which to do physics and to share all of these adventures with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shane. So now we're going to move into some pre-prepared questions for the panelists. But also I would remind you that if you want to submit questions, which we will get to in a bit, please feel free to either type it on the chat or use the Padlet board to submit your questions. There's already some questions there if you want to look at that. So the first question that I have for the panelists is, there are many different terms used to describe activities in which physicists, scientists, science communicators, practitioners do to engage with the public. Could you tell, is there correct terminology? Why are there many different terms to refer to this? And how will you describe the difference between those terms, if any? So I will start with Katie, and then if anyone else wants to intervene following that, please do. Katie?
Oh, thanks, Claudia. I'll share a little of my thoughts, but let other people jump in. I think I'll just say personally, for a long time, I used a lot of these words sort of interchangeably. And I think that is sort of fine. But I might say that, you know, I guess historically in studies on communication studies and science communication studies, that the term outreach has become a little less popular because it has this sort of implication of a quote unquote deficit model. So we have something as physicists that you don't have, and we need to give it to you to help you. And that's a different sort of framing than public engagement, something that is more participatory, back and forth. We listen to you, you listen to us, we share and communicate together. I am used to using the term informal physics. This is also an interestingly fraught term, sort of delineated by like something not being in a classroom setting. But of course, as physicists, we go into people's classrooms and give presentations and judge projects and do all kinds of interactive stuff with people in their classrooms. So there's also not like a bifurcation, I don't think, between those two things. And it also, I think the framing depends on if you're a physicist or a physics person who's like wanting to engage versus one of the members of the public or one of these publics. You know, you might perceive yourself not as receiving outreach, but as engaging in a program or doing something like that. But yeah, and so I think we all refer to them in our work in a lot of different ways. I don't know what other people think.
Yeah, may I come in after that, Claudia? Is that okay?
Go ahead, Shane.
Thank you. I completely agree with everything Katie has said. And I suppose the other things that come to mind are, in the past, a lot of the money for the activities that we do came from a place of we're trying to get more people into physics, or perhaps today to try and get different sorts of people into physics. And they're great goals, but I suppose we can think of broader goals, such as maybe we can change physics as a result of diversifying or bringing more people in, or thinking about how we work as a community. And so there's a huge opportunity, but also a huge responsibility on us when we start to talk about informal learning and public engagement. But I don't know about people watching or other panelists, but I kind of feel uncomfortable at this stage as just kind of, putting or positioning outreach as the add-on just to get the funding for the laser that we need in the lab. I think what we do is incredibly important, because such a tiny percentage of our populations will get to call themselves a physicist or study physics in school, but that shouldn't mean that knowledge is exclusive, or that way of thinking is exclusive to them. What about physics seeping out into the world and having a positive influence on the way we think and shape our world?
Mario, I wanted to get your input on this, particularly because we recently had a discussion about whether, mentoring counts as a form of engaging the public, and how do we define that as whether it is because it's in the field, without the field. Do you have any particular thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that mentoring is engaging the public. In a sense, we're doing this, helping people realize what's important about science. What is it that drove us into science? And if we're good mentors, our mentees, maybe the definition is not that we need to be mentors to make mini-me's, right? But actually make them into scientists. They don't have to be the same type of scientist as you are, but they can think and have the scientific ideals of thinking of how we do things. And this is something that I think about, especially, for instance, seeing all the what's happening with the pandemic, right? We don't have just a pandemic based on pathogens, but actually we saw across the US that there was a pandemic of opinions. People talking about how using a mask was bad, or he was infringing on their rights. And we as scientists understood that this was not correct, right? But there was no way for us to convince people. I think that that's part of the mentoring that we're doing too, that we're helping people. Our young students come in and tell their parents, this is not right, because we just saw this picture, something like similar to what Stephen showed with the picture of the aerosols going into people's noses, or videos like that are not distributed correctly. So we have all of these things to do, and improving human behavior is crucial, right? And I think that that's something that we can do with mentoring. It's a very hands-on approach of doing things.
Thank you. So there's no more comments on that one. I'll move. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'll just say one thing. It's sort of a general comment, but you know, I look at it, how I look at our job has changed over time. I think I jumped out into the program of what we called outreach at the time, thinking I was going to explain everything about particle physics to everybody, and they were all going to love it, right? And they were all going to learn. Since then, I've realized that our job is actually quite easy. People are born scientists. Everybody's excited about nature. When we're little babies, we look and we see that the sky is blue, and we love it. Everyone loves to play with stuff and learn things, and they do that. I feel, to me, my job is to just sort of bring that back out. I think that calling it sort of informal education is nice in a sense, Katie, because I think, you know, to me, if I go into a classroom, it's just to remind them that it's not just a bunch of equations, F equals MA and all that. It's exciting, and it's something that you always wanted to do. So I'm there to just give a little catalyst, a little push. And then, as you know, as Mario was saying, and you know, there is that little bit of pushing in the right direction, let's say, of reminding them that there's a sort of a process to the way we think about things. We don't eat a cheeseburger and tweet to get the truth. We do really, really hard work to come out at the truth, and we check each other, and that process, I think, is what I really, really enjoy trying to get over to them. Okay, that's my speech.
And you bring a good point, which, I mean, we will get back to that later on, because there have been questions about that. But one of the things that I've read about, you know, misinformation, science distrust, and conspiracy theories is that we need to show consensus and also the process of doing science, that people need to understand that doing science sometimes is messy, in terms that we do the best we can with the resources and data that we had at that point, and that is constantly evolving and improving. Because, for example, with the vaccines, I know personally my parents had were in that vaccine hesitancy group, and they were like, well, one day they were telling me they will take years for the vaccines to come out, and then, you know, a couple of months later there's a vaccine. So they were like, well, how do I know I can trust that vaccine? So very good point there. So, but we'll get back to that, I promise. But I'll move to our next question. So within the physics field in particular, we're familiar with physics department open houses, public lectures, and demo shows. Do you think there is a reason for those formats to be the characteristic forms, the more traditional forms of public engagement activities that departments and higher education institutions engage in? And I would like Shannon to start, or maybe Stephanie.
Sure, I can start. Sure. I think a big reason is that they're familiar and they're fun. I think that it's a model that's been tested with mixed results, I'll admit. But I do think that the familiarity of it and the funness of it, I don't know that like any content in things like that actually get communicated, or at least, you know, truly anybody internalizes any of that content. But what they do walk away from is a warm, fuzzy feeling about science, the institution, and the scientists themselves. And I think that's really in the value of it. Yeah, as far as the terms of outreach and public engagement and informal learning and stuff, I used to think that there was sort of this continuum of communication, outreach, and education. And it was sort of a depth continuum. Like communication was just like, you know, publishing an article, and if they read it, great, or they listen to a podcast, great, but you don't know what the audience did with that information. And then I always felt like outreach was sort of something slightly deeper, and you develop sort of the awareness and the positive attitudes towards something. And then education was something where the person really changed their fundamental conceptions about something, and that was awesome. And I always thought that that was sort of the best. But actually now I'm kind of feeling like the engagement itself is what's the best. And that's where I think that those programs, I think there's other ways to do it, but I do think that they do a lot for making people feel like they could be scientists, and scientists appearing more like people. I think that when scientists do these kinds of events, a lot of times they show their excitement, and you can tell that they really love something. And that passion for something is catching and interesting and human, and people can relate to that regardless of the topic that they're studying. And I feel like that's a real value. And they can also just like share their hobbies, and they share their cultural history. And there's so many opportunities to engage with that, even in these open houses and demo shows and stuff. Like, yeah, that's sort of my thoughts on that. Steffi, did you want to add something to that?
I'll add a couple of things. I thought Shannon did a great job answering this question, so I won't add too much. I will echo what she said about sharing personal things about yourself and hobbies. Once I started doing that, in the beginning of all of my talks, I start with a picture of what I am outside of science. And then I go into what I do in science. And when I started doing that, I got more people coming up to me afterwards. They're like, hey, I'm interested in art too. And now that I saw that you are, and that you've done art before, I can see myself as a scientist too, or just something to get the conversation going afterwards. So I think a lot of these sharing personal things like that, sharing struggles that science is challenging, that is really helpful to share in these events too, because oftentimes people see these great big demos and it's exciting and wonderful, but they don't see that we also struggled along the way through our career to get here. And then also these big events too that a lot of departments do may not be as personal. So I mentioned a couple ways to bring that personal touch in to engage afterwards, but also having tables of demos when people leave that they can actually interact, and having more people available to talk to them one-on-one kind of furthers that engagement too.
So I'll have Lindsay comment on that, and then Shane, we can come on.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. And I think anything that we can do to make science more approachable, to feel like you can explain that science is fluid. I think some people are really disappointed when they find out, oh, the facts are always changing. Well, science is a process. And I think the more that can be shared with the public, and I also like that idea of sharing the struggle of an actual scientist, and personal stories, that makes it more dramatic, and that makes it more approachable to other people. So but I'm really enjoying listening to what everyone's saying.
Shane,
Yeah, thank you. I suppose I just add maybe a note of concern that if part of the logic is to encourage more people to come into science, be that peripherally or centrally, science is not a welcoming place for a lot of people, and we understand that quite well, unfortunately. Unless science and physics in particular is willing to change to be more inclusive, then I become very uncomfortable about going to open days and doing the whole, yeah, come to science, it's great, because I know that it's not inclusive. So I guess there's always a slight hesitation that unless the powers that be in science and in physics are going to work to make it more inclusive, then I'm not sure how ethical it is to encourage more people to come into it. Thank you.
Thank you. So actually, next question relates to that. So who are the different publics that we should be engaging in? And I'm using publics very explicitly, because I mean that there, as Shannon mentioned, there's no one single public that we put on a box and everyone is the same, but it's a variety of audiences. And then how can we build partnerships with these audience let them have some agency and meaningful interaction so that we can connect to their interests and their needs. So Mario, would you like to say something on that?
Yeah, so in terms of who are the different publics that we should be engaging with, I think that we're always engaging with, for instance, our colleagues. They're also part of the public, right? We get colloquiums and seminars every week. And in the colloquium, the job of somebody in high energy physics, for instance, is to show me, a condensed matter physicist, why is it that a huge investment should be made in making Fermilab better, or CERN, or other particular endeavors like that. Same with astronomers, same, all of the scientists are basically competing for the same amount of funding. And that's how they're engaging with all of us. We're engaging with each other and showing that what we do needs to be funded, is part of the science process. So therefore we have not just public, but the people around us, their colleagues are part of the public. Then we have our students, the students that are taking classes with us, and the students that are physics majors are also part of the public. We have to include all of, for instance, our departments are the ones that are teaching the engineers the basics of how they're going to start doing their engineering work through physics, right? So we have to engage them as a public in a way that makes it so that, for instance, maybe engineering departments are going to say, like, we want to teach our students physics 1 because you guys are not doing a good job. That's not good for us as a physics community. And therefore, we have all of those as our public. So I think that there's different audiences, but we need to build partnerships with all of them so that they realize how important physicists are in their setting too. And we need to connect with them. We need to make sure that we have their support in us continuing doing what we do.
Thank you. We've got Katie, and then I'll get to you, Shannon.
Okay, I like all the things that Mario has been saying. I'll maybe add on a little that you know, when we talk about publics, like, and I think this comment was in the, Stephen, you make this comment in the chat earlier, like, you know, we are physicists are part of the public, right? So I think one way we can think about that is, and how to make partnerships, is that we are part of local communities, right, around our institutions. And that really specifically from what we've been looking at is that, and I think all of us know, that really physics students are driving most of this work, right, on the large scale, right? They're the volunteers. They're the ones helping make a lot of these programs, especially maybe the less niche ones, maybe like the bigger open houses, maybe the more demo show, maybe those, they're the ones like making them run. And they come from local communities as well. So I think starting there helps us maybe move away from this idea that we reach out to people who don't have something to give them this wonderful opportunity that we all have. And instead thinking about how do we participate in the communities ourselves? What are the available sort of opportunities for us to share our joy and our enthusiasm and the scientific process with our own communities? And to some of us, that means maybe becoming more aware of our own communities and not just being siloed in our lab and our space and our academic institution, but thinking about where do I live and who lives there too, and what can we do?
Shannon?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about what some of these programs, and not just the public house, open houses and demo shows and stuff, do in terms of thinking of the scientists themselves as part of the public. And I think a little bit of it does address a little bit of what Shane was, in a tiny way, addresses what he's bringing up. I do think it helps when scientists talk to non-scientists or science enthusiasts, or someone who's interested in entering the field. It exposes them to people that and expands their idea of who can do science. I think that it makes me think of the Peace Corps, actually. I remember meeting with some Peace Corps folks one time, and they admitted that the Peace Corps does more for the volunteers than it does for the community that they go to sometimes, in terms of changing a person's perception of what else is out there outside your own little world. And it brings awareness to the person who's doing the outreach themselves. It makes them aware of the community that they're in, and makes them aware of, you know, just the capabilities of people that are not just like them. I think it does some good for that. But also I wanted to bring up the public of early career scientists and the social media outreach and engagement efforts that are going on. What I see a lot on Twitter and TikTok, et cetera, is yes, there's a lot of great science communicators reaching out to non-scientists and explaining things, or even reaching out to scientists of other fields. That's another public. But sharing their struggles and making and creating a whole community of support. And I feel like that is an interesting kind of engagement that also changes people's perceptions of identities of scientists as being this brilliant person who never makes mistakes and never struggles. And I think is making a safer place for all young scientists coming into this, is that it's okay to struggle, it's okay to have mental health issues, it's okay to have outside interests, it's all okay, and we're all human beings, and it's wonderful. So I feel like that's also something that we should be talking about. So
yes, and we're all runners or moms or partners of some form. So yeah, Stephen, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think what Shannon said was very important. And you know, we notice that one thing, there's a lot of students getting engaged, especially early on, because I think they're used to sharing things now. They go everywhere with this, right? So it's going to go up on Instagram. If it doesn't go up on Instagram, it didn't happen. But they're also getting involved in our programs and in doing things. It's easy to find them. We often have in our experiment early career scientist board, we have these used to be meet and eats, but now we're in, sitting at home. But they want to do it. They like to do it. And the thing that's a shame, at least what happened to earlier generations, and maybe it won't happen in this generation, is they get scared away from it at the point where they have to go tenure track and they need to produce papers, they need to produce research, they need to do these things. One thing that I think that one of the very few things that's really missing for us to do much more and to be more engaged, and we all agree this is good for everyone. Every scientist should at least try, because having to explain what you do to the public it's so incredibly good. It just gives you a clear picture in your mind where you fit in. Is that, senior physicists who are hiring need to be encouraged to look at CVs and look for that little check mark that says that this person did education or outreach, or they were involved in communication, and to value that and to say that's a good thing. I want this person, because they'll be able to help write requests for funding and things like this. Maybe a selfish reason for it, but they understand the big picture. They have a good view of things. So we need to put pressure there whenever possible on senior faculty when they're hiring to consider that. I think it's a small gap that we have to fill.
Thank you. And that leads to your next and last question, prepare question. So the public, if you have the audience, if you have questions, feel free to put them on the chat or on the Padlet board. So the last question, connecting to the diverse audiences and publics, leads to, so are the diverse forms of engaging these different audiences? And I think that one thing that, was kind of, we barely touched on it was like the building the partnerships fulfill different purposes. Should we focus on specific formats for specific audiences, or can they have different impacts particularly in terms of inclusivity and diversity within the field. Lindsay, do you want to start on that one?
I think that I've run across some hesitancy in academic departments to work across the different departments. And I think that if you're wanting to build diversity, it has to start with this idea that we can't all be living in our own little academic space. We have to like bust out and feel a little uncomfortable. You know, I like to talk about how some of the most science phobic people on earth are artists, and yet I can bring this project about science in and find a connection. And there have to be connections with other departments too. I know that Illinois Physics, the University of Illinois, they have been doing some absolutely astonishing work, engaging theater groups, a dance group, poets, and the work, you know, part of the work of what I do or what other creative types or humanities people do is what we bring to science is this idea of empathy. And empathy is a real connector. And when scientists see the work that I create based on their research, and when the public sees my art based on their research, that is creating a way of saying you're welcome. You belong here. And even if your interest is only maybe this much science, I think that that is beneficial.
Yes, and I love the word belonging. That's something that I research on. How can we make different audiences, different publics feel like they belong in physics? Stephanie, would you like to comment on Lindsay?
I thought Lindsay covered it great. I will add something. The program that I kind of stumbled upon to reach out to audiences that I don't normally like have access to or something like that is pretty much I'm focused on local events. Where can I go locally? And then how can you engage beyond that? There's a great science pen pals program, Letters to a Pre-Scientist, which I thought was a really creative idea to reach a more broad and diverse audience. And it matches people who have never, these are students in middle school who've never met a scientist ever. And you have similar interests like video games, art, drawing, and stuff like that. And you do over the course of a year, pen pal, you write actual letters, you draw, you know, drawings to each other. And I'm learning from my pen pal about what they engage with and how they see science. And they're learning from me on how to be a scientist, and that I have similar interests to them. So these are just, there's very creative ways that are out there that we can kind of tap into and look into broader our you know, our reach.
That's a wonderful comment. And I think, you know, if scientists could think about these one-on-one connections, maybe not even through a formal pen pal program, although I think that's brilliant, but just this idea of injecting science into casual conversations everywhere. Science and art and all these other disciplines, they belong everywhere. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, it reminds, so a comment that Stephen made and this pen pal thing is, well, the comment about Stephen was like, there was a time where if the relationship was not posted on Facebook, it wasn't a real relationship. And we're in that kind of generation where, you know, everything happens online. But also there's a great program, and it started here in the UK, and I know that they have it also in Maine, where schools can have connect through Twitter with scientists, and then the scientists will tweet every day, like what are they doing at different points of the day, which is not just, oh, I'm in the lab testing these things, but I'm having this for breakfast, I am, you know, going for a run today, type of thing, so that it shows all the different facets of a scientist. But Mario, you have your hand up, you want to comment?
So, yeah, thank you. So, so what I wanted to comment on is that I think we need some really different programs. I guess this is a challenge that I see in figuring out how do we engage with different groups, right? So for instance, one of the challenges that I see is that I'm in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is one of the states with the highest population of indigenous Native Americans. And the physics programs don't have the representation of Native Americans that we should expect due to the size of the state. So one of the things we were here reaching out to people, maybe the tribal colleges, maybe, and then we realized that we're not doing things right because we don't know how to engage with them. We actually have to overcome. So our Native American populations have been deceived several times over. And if you tell them like, you should come study physics, physics is great, they'll be like, what's the trick here? You know, that's something that we actually have to work a lot harder as physicists. And I think that is part of what Shane talked about earlier, that we have to make sure that our diversity efforts and inclusivity also make sure that we're not just talking about them, but make it safer for individuals that are different from us to be members of our community. So for instance, when you see that LGBTQ people, I think there's some statistics from APS that says that about 50% of them don't feel safe displaying that they're LGBTQ in their community. That's pretty frightening, and that's something that we need to do and change in physics.
Yeah, great point. So Stephen has another comment on that. Stephen.
It was just follow up because I'm sensitive to what Mario says. I think it's very important. In fact, I went to, I don't know if I met you several years back. There was a mentoring event that was held at Oklahoma State. I have a good friend, Kate Shaw, who goes around the world basically, but typically to countries that are developing or that just aren't in physics or particle physics. They're very underrepresented. For example, she travels through Palestine. She went to different places in the Middle East and Afghanistan even. And she said, you have to be very, very sensitive to local cultures anywhere. And I view indigenous peoples in our country also there are cultures, many cultures. I was surprised to learn how many hundreds of nations there are. And you know, and we were touching on this earlier too. There's this, you can end up colonizing again. You know, this is the defense that people get on is you know, we're suspicious. What are you doing? You've been here before, and we have to avoid that. And the way, I mean, this idea that we're interacting and engaging needs to be a two-way street is so completely correct. That's what it needs to be. I've had a tremendous time thanks to an artist who's joined us, who's going to give another. I don't know if she's still here. Are you still here? I'm looking. Well, Agnes Chavez is her name. She's going to give a talk later on in another seminar series. But thanks to her, I've had the opportunity to connect with some people I never would have, including a Lakota cultural specialist. And we put on sort of through art, we met with students and engaged with them, describing different views of the world. And so in this case, physicists have to open up their minds a little bit. We have a certain cosmology that we're used to, that's a modern cosmology that's pretty strict. This is the way it was 13.8 billion years. And then we also presented Lakota cosmology, which is very similar to many other indigenous nations. The Seven Sisters made the Pleiades in this. But we could have this discussion because we agreed on facts and observation. And so that kind of underlied something that a point that we tried to make to the public in general, that you make measurements first. You can come up with stories, you can come up with theories behind these, but we all have to at least agree on facts, and then our peoples can come together. And so getting into engagement and discussion, I completely agree. Whoever said that before, I don't remember if it was Katie or who mentioned that, or Steffi, but it's, you know, that engagement, so that you're listening as well as speaking, which I'm doing a very bad job of doing right now. So I will shut up and let us go on.
Thank you. So I will open up now the questions from the public. So we already have quite a few questions on the Padlet board, and I'll just ask the two easiest ones first, because that will be fast. One question from a couple of people in the audience is, could they get the speakers' emails or contact information? So if the speakers are willing to do that, like, please go into the Padlet board and type your contact information there. The other easy question, I think that Stephen already put some answers in there for the CERN arts in residency, but Lindsay, there were people asking about the Fermilab arts in residency option. So if you could give some details on how to do that. Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry, yeah. I'll post that in chat. Just give me a couple secs.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, so one question that was asked early on, it has to do with how can we, the people who are trying to engage with other audiences, do better at engaging with these audiences to prevent the spread of misinformation and science distrust. So I know that some of this came from Stephen's presentation. So, but they also pointed out, like, fusion, it's another very controversial topic in that, and there's a lot of misinformation on that. So if either Stephen or Shannon, Stephanie wants to jump in.
I'll throw in a couple cents. One thing is, I think on conspiracy theories or misinformation or whatever, speak on your own expertise. Do not claim expertise in epidemiology if you are a particle physicist, please. I would say that. I think fusion, I don't think, has as much of an issue as fission. Steffi, do you agree with that? Well, as far as people being afraid of it anyway.
I think that we can be forward thinking to see what we can do to make people, so people in general like fusion as a concept, right? We haven't built a plant yet. So what can we learn from fission? We engage with people who would be living near a fusion power plant. We do it now. And we ask them, you know, you talk about the science and how great it is. And you ask them, you know, if you had a fusion power plant right by next door, what would you be concerned about? And we take that input and we do more research and we engage with them again, instead of engaging with them at the end of the process and saying, here, there's a power plant in your back door. So I think that would be great if we could start that now.
I love that approach. I like to call it the judo approach to conspiracy theories or fears. I don't know if you've ever done judo. I did it 100 years ago for, you know, a short time, and I was terrible. But what I do remember from it is that if someone comes and punches at you, the best thing to do isn't to try to counter the punch. It's to grab the arm and pull them in that same direction, because they're already going there. And so I like to use this. If someone has a conspiracy theory, I ask them to explain it and give me all of the possible details about it. So just like with the fusion, you ask, tell me why it's a danger. I'd like to know, and keep them going, because sooner or later, if it's a conspiracy theory, it's going to fall apart. It's going to run into a wall. It's going to be impossible for them to explain. They might not at that point admit it. Oh, they'll just say, well, it's complicated, I have to look it up or something like that. But still, it's showing them the respect and and pushing them to that extreme.
Shane had
Claudia,
something to say. Go ahead, Shane. I was just going to make sure you got.
Thank you, Shannon. I think one of the ways that we can deepen our engagement is by understanding the importance of research, so that we can learn from what we're doing, and that perhaps one of the greatest advantages would be to decouple public engagement or outreach money from the sort of promotion of a center or the recruitment of undergraduate students, that if it could be worthy on its own as any other form of education is, and that we learn from what we're doing, so that it, you know, we're not, as famously quoted in that Joe Reddish paper in physics, we're not reinventing the flat tire every couple of years and saying, hey, I've just developed this new program, I'm very creative and I've had a great idea, and I've no idea that 5 or 6 other groups have done similar things, and I'm going to fall into all the pitfalls that they fell into, rather than work with them and learn from them. So I think research would be the fundamentally most important thing we could do to deepen our engagement.
I also think we should think about who is doing the science communication, and it shouldn't necessarily be the same experts every time. I have no idea if this guy is even has a science background, but I love his TikToks. I'm going to try to post the link. But if you're offended by cursing, please don't click on this. But I'll share it and people can look at it in their own time. But I don't know if he's a scientist or not. But he's explaining what lightning is, and it's Steffi, you should totally check it out, because lightning's plasma. Anyway, it's super fun. I just think that that the same old folks doing the same old talks over and over again, it gets a little stale. It's not the best way to connect to different audiences. If you're at a big center and you've got lots of people to choose from, spread the love. And get more and more people engaged. It's good for them, it's good for the audience, it's good for everybody. So, it definitely expands everyone's view of who can do this stuff. And the point is that everyone can. So.
And may I come back and just say, like, our chief science advisor in Ireland many years ago, he would certainly have that deficit model of there's a lot of people out there that need to learn some physics. And his idea of success for what engagement would look like was that if a politician knocked on, we knock on one another's doors here when it comes to elections, and you get to meet your representative. And he said that a real marker of success would be that if the member of the public brought up a socio-scientific issue. Now that's happened because we're living through a pandemic. What I think our chief science advisor may not have realized was that if the public are going to talk about science, they may not talk about it, and nor should they be expected to talk about it on the terms that he feels is appropriate. We don't own science. We are scientists, but we cannot expect to just put out the good news and then not take the rough with the smooth. So I think real deep engagement would move us far away from the deficit models that are quite pervasive, and move us through the dialogue to perhaps a place where, you know, we would need, as Shannon has just suggested, a real diversity of people who would call themselves science communicators or science engagers or science allies. And that would be a very, very interesting space. But it's one that we'll have to accept we can't control because people are involved.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like, from what I've read and learned, part of one of the series that Shane is moderating, it's that there are some like minimal fundamental things that we need to take into account when we're facing this kind of situations. And one is be humble, you know, as Stephen said, like, make sure to listen and understand before you just like blurt out a bunch of facts. And sometimes we need to take a deep breath before we speak, so that we don't let our hurt ego maybe come out, or, you know, like, oh my God, how could you? Like, I always make a joke, which is true. So as I mentioned, my dad was like a big vaccine hesitant person, and I I didn't engage with him on that conversation because I was like, I'm not going to get anywhere. I'm the daughter, and the daughter is never right. And one time, without me bringing it up, he just said, I had a talk with my mechanic, and he just told me all the reasons why he's not getting the vaccine. And I asked him if I could give you his number so he can explain to you why I'm not getting the vaccine. And I was like, I'm not even gonna, I just laughed it up and then left it like that. And then peer pressure worked and my dad finally got the vaccine. But, you know, it's one of those ones that I got like, oh, I need to just step out. The other thing that I've heard is also that we need to think about consensus instead of, as many of our speakers have said, like one specific expert on it. No, there's a lot of people who have looked into these issues, and with the data and resources that we currently have, this is the information this is what the data is telling us. And the other thing is the messiness of the science process that, you know, many people, because our own fault, have expressed that, you know, we know. Yes, we do know when we do tests, but we do millions of tests over and over. And as being one of those people who once published a paper on Science magazine, and then a year later, that science paper had to be retracted because we were not getting the same signal that we have said we saw, you know, we have to explain to general audiences that that's the way science works. I mean, we might say something now because that's what we're seeing, but maybe when we have better instruments to measure or better data, or different ways of analyzing the data, then other responses come out. So things to consider, and then also approaching from different ways and having different ways of connecting, which is like a pedagogical content kind of thing that comes to mind with understanding where they're coming from. So I had another question that was related to on those lines, which is like, should we engage with social scientists, you know, to sometimes sort out some of these topics of how to approach different audiences and maybe how to engage with the public in different forums? So if anybody has some thoughts on that.
I think when we're doing that, we kind of become social scientists, but we shouldn't. I think also it's really important that physicists are involved. Like you, Claudia, would be somebody who's a great example of a success in discipline-based education research. And I think, you know, like it's really important that physicists are involved in that research, but that they use the tools of social science often and work with social scientists. But I go back to that phrase I used earlier on, that there's epistemic strength in diversity. You know, when you have a great diverse bunch of people who use diverse tools to try and engage with really complicated questions, like the types of questions we're asking, which ultimately are far tougher than questions about particle physics or quantum mechanics, because they're really hard to know whether we're measuring what we think we're measuring. And so I think having the broadest team possible can only do us good, you know. But I know some people can be maybe a little bit territorial about where the balance should lie between those things, but I don't know what others think.
I think the more we do that, the more we do engage across these disciplines, the more normalized that becomes. And because I do think that there is a stigma. I think it's old and I think it's fading, but I do think that physicists traditionally have kind of dismissed social science and not seen it as, you know, as legitimate. They've had a nasty attitude about it historically. And I think that the more people participate in these collaborations, the more other scientists who don't even do that see it as having value, and it changes them. It's again another one of these examples of the process of doing things changes the people doing it and the people adjacent to it.
So I'll say we have maybe one or two more questions. So one of the other questions was, how do we get meaningful engagement, and how do we know that we're having meaningful engagement? So that's a tough one out there. Lindsay, you want to comment on that since you touch onto the empathy element and how your art pieces help make those type of connections?
Well, yeah, I think the more meaningful connections are oftentimes in very small groups or one-on-one, and that's something that's difficult to quantify. But I think making engagements with people, like others have talked about, creating a link for trusted information, that is, I think, a really important thing. And Shannon, didn't you mention peer pressure that got your dad to get vaccinated? You know, I think that's really kind of cool. You know, I think peer pressure and that one-on-one connection with trusted sources and being very transparent about, like others have said, that science is a messy process. And it's not that we're looking for hard and fast facts. You know, scientists are looking for a broader vision, and that vision gets broader as the instruments improve, as certain other areas of science develop. You know, that's all sometimes interdependent, and it's confusing to people, but the more we can get that message out, the better.
Thank you. Katie or Stephanie, do you want to comment on that?
I can say something. I think, you know, as everyone who's involved in a physics educational activity that's outside of a classroom environment knows, it's like really challenging to do assessment and evaluation in a class. For people to do anything you want, right? You have exams, we have standardized tests now, right, that can assess things in, you know, high school, college level, et cetera, and compare different groups. That's just not possible, because that actually like can dissuade engagement, can change the kind of engagement you have in any of these informal settings. And some of our events are like these moments, right? So like, how do you characterize a really important 5 minutes, right, that someone might have, like looking at an artwork or speaking with someone? So I think expanding our idea of what is meaningful is important as physicists, and then actually communicating within the physics community that quantitative data is not necessarily like an appropriate tool to like assess like the efficacy and the success of these environments is really important. Sometimes I think that physicists and funding agencies like numbers and numbers of people involved, and that doesn't necessarily equate to having an experience that can touch you and help change your worldview or your career path or whatever. And so I think like for anyone running a program or event or an activity or something, thinking about like what your goals are, and then are you achieving those goals? So is your goal to, you know, share, you know, moments of excitement and joy with audiences? How are you doing that? Can you think about how you might like to assess or evaluate if that's happening? Is your goal to support undergraduates at your institution who are, you know, going out and engaging with the public? That might be an easier thing to assess because you have more access to them over a longer period of time. Are you looking to get your faculty better at communicating about their research area, right? That might be another goal. So thinking about it in terms of those things instead of absolutes, and definitely moving away, as many other people have mentioned, from thinking about it. Did people learn about the thing? Is maybe a not an ideal way of thinking. Did we teach the public about our specific topic? Because also that's probably we did not, you know, in the same way that we would ask that question in the classroom.
I'll just, these are great comments, and so I just want to add a couple of things. So I guess what I do is I tend to go off direct engagement at the events I'm at. So I worked at a national lab, and they had this traveling science fair. It's trailers, they're gorgeous, everything's laid out really, really well. They have hands-on exhibits. But it's kind of everyone files in a line, they go through the line, they do the activity, and they leave. So what I did was we were sending all of the trailers out to the USA Science and Engineering Fair at DC. It's every other year. It's amazing. It's huge. I flew out with 2 huge suitcases of like handmade demos, scrounged up tables, had like plasma trading cards, and had it set up outside. So I'm entertaining people on the way in the crowds. And so you can see people, they're like learning on the spot. They get a card, they're running off to their parents to tell them about these facts. They're doing these hand-on demos, running off to their parents to tell them what they're learning. So kind of be in the moment and see how your audience reacts and be willing to adapt. That's the way I go. This is more, I don't take numbers down, but really be in tune with your audience and what your purpose is that you're trying to get across.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to comment on that one?
I'll make one small comment. Small, I promise. I mean, yeah, I think that my criteria has shrunk over the years from having everybody learn everything. But now I think, and you can probably agree with me, Steffi, Katie, you can see, and I have no idea how to quantify this, but you can see the light in the eyes. You can tell if you engage with someone or not. I've had a lot of practice at this. I also make music as well and look at the audience to see if we're engaging, if it's working or not. And you have certain people who can do that, who can interact with an audience, and you can tell whether it's one-on-one. And some of my best interactions where I felt I made the absolute most success was one person, which is fine. That's great. You've changed one person and you've learned yourself from that person. So I totally agree with Katie that numbers are really not a measure of how well we're engaging the public.
Shannon.
That being said, there are evaluation tools. So you can measure attitude changes, but like Katie said, it can impact your program. You don't want to like make your program you don't want to harass your participants with surveys and stuff. Like there's a limit, but there are people who have done it and shown positive changes in attitudes towards science, towards the process of science, towards scientists themselves and trust in science. And if you read that research and base your program on that research and use the proven methods, then you can kind of safely bet that you will probably have similar outcomes. So I encourage people to do research-based activities.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Shannon, for that. I actually, we share the slides of the previous workshop that touches on how to do effective and meaningful design programs. And there will be a workshop sometime on the end of the seminar series on how to assess your target program. So I think that we are kind of out of time now. I just wanted to first say the speakers have shared their information on the Padlet board. Let me just share that link again. So you have, everyone has that. And there's also a set of resources that have been shared on that board from, Lindsay shared all the resources and information about the arts residency at Fermilab and CERN. So thanks all the speakers for these very interesting conversations. One comment that we didn't get to, but I think that is really important and I'm gonna touch it on, is that yes, the idea of this panel was to have a broader perspective of how we as a community can have discussions about how what are our values. So Shane mentioned at the beginning, like the idea of working on a community of practice. And in fact, the idea of this seminar series is with the intention of helping building that community of practice. So hopefully coming soon, we will have Juniper, and where we will have more opportunities to expand on these conversations and identify what are our values, what are our practices as a community to engage with diverse audiences. And then the last thing that I want to say is that, we'll be offering these other events. So the Juneteenth Freedom Day, we're celebrating in collaboration with Black in Physics. It's a wiki editathon. So you will get an introduction on how to edit wiki pages. And then the idea is that we will highlight or edit and create wiki pages for scientists that have been neglected in the past, or that they deserve their space on Wikipedia. And we also have the Wiki Scientist course that will be running at the end of the summer. And then one last thing is that, part of the research that we do is to understand what are the things that are happening out there. So there's a quick survey if you can fill it out with information about your program. That will be great. And with that, I let the speakers, if they have one last word to say, and thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you in future events.
Thank you
you very
for having
much.
this event. It's a great event.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye. Thanks.
everyone.
Thank